In 2020, the EU stated its commitments to becoming a carbon-neutral economy by 2050. To achieve this goal, the EU needs to make some serious changes in all areas of the economy. What steps does it need to take? What building blocks has the EU proposed in order to achieve the energy transition? The learning objective for today is to discuss the necessary steps to be taken to achieve the EU's 2050 energy transition goals. Recently, the EU has set itself some ambitious targets in its efforts to achieve the energy transition, including aiming to become a climate-neutral economy by 2050, reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% compared to 1990 levels by 2030, increasing renewable generation in the energy mix to 32% by 2030, and to follow the Paris Climate Agreement's efforts to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. So how will the EU meet these goals? The European Green New Deal of 2020 lays out some building blocks to a carbon-neutral EU in 2050. These include increasing climate ambition, supplying green energy and carbon-free mobility, mobilizing industry, and designing a fairer food system. These building blocks will be similar all over the world, although for many countries in the global south, supplying basic needs like electricity and clean water will be a higher priority. The first step we will look at is the need for increased climate ambition. Despite considerable efforts, the current policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are not enough to meet the Paris Climate Agreement goals. Even with these policies, the world will still reach temperatures of 3 to 3.4 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which could have disastrous effects on the planet. As a result, increased climate ambition is needed to achieve the energy transition and to stay within the goals set out by the Paris Climate Agreement. The EU also aims to change the industry sector. Currently, industry contributes to 25% of energy usage in the EU and produces 20% of greenhouse gases. Thus, it is an important part of the energy transition. One strategy is to use government financing and policy to incentivize sustainable business models aimed at climate neutrality, efficiency, and circularity. These are all key components to achieving carbon-free industry. At the same time, it is important to ensure that industry maintains international competitiveness to ensure sustainable economic progress. And finally, one of the most challenging elements to consider is the decarbonisation of industry. Many processes in industry rely heavily on carbon sources, like cement or chemical processing, and it will take a long time to replace these well-developed processing methods. Although replacement methods are being researched, most are still in the development stages. Mobility is another huge area of energy consumption that requires tackling as a part of the energy transition. Transport makes up 31% of EU energy consumption, whilst producing 21% of its greenhouse gases. Different areas of mobility require different solutions for decarbonisation. Aviation is especially difficult. An alternative carbon-neutral fuel is still far away from realisation, and current flight prices mean consumers use flights freely even for shorter journeys. While alternative fuels are being developed, it may be possible to reduce the number of flights by making alternative forms of transport, such as trains, more easily accessible. Shipping is another issue. Currently, shipping fuel uses the most polluting part of the oil barrel, as it is burnt in international waters. However, alternative fuels are currently being researched. Closer to home, there needs to be wider deployment of zero-emission vehicles and EV charging structure across the EU. This will enable these vehicles to become more accessible and more appealing to consumers. This is already being done in some countries such as the Netherlands and Norway. Finally, for many shorter distance journeys in urban areas, it is possible to use transport that is already available. Improving cycling infrastructure and public transport in cities could encourage consumers to choose those options instead of driving and reduce the usage of cars. One sector that contributes significantly to greenhouse gas emissions is agriculture. It accounts for 11% of CO2 emissions in the EU and is also the largest contributor of non-CO2 emissions. We have all heard how cows farming produces a lot of methane, for example, as does rice crops and also over-fertilisation of soils. To combat this, the EU is introducing the Farm to Fork strategy. This strategy will promote sustainable practices in farming, like organic farming, and incentivise farmers to transition towards these more sustainable practices in a fair and economic way. In addition, the EU will present initiatives to improve efficiency in farming and in food processing, as well as incorporating new zero-carbon technologies. Finally, the EU aims to reduce food waste throughout the food production chain. This will reduce energy usage, improve energy efficiency in the sector, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions from wasted food and overproduction. In this video, we have described just a few of the steps the EU is taking to bring about the energy transition and to become a climate-neutral economy by 2050. What other sectors do you think should be addressed in these steps?